Stress is the main thing that needs to be managed. Everyone talks about it, but you won't find specifics anywhere. Yes, you need to manage stress. Yes, you need to reduce it. And yes, the lower your stress level and the better you can manage it, the more you can think and act correctly and pragmatically. But how? That's exactly what you'll learn in this video lecture. This will help not only in choosing the right woman, but also in managing her, if you already have one, in a way that your interest in her doesn't fade. Besides your relationship with a woman, the ability to manage stress will help you in your life achievements. It's clear that today, most women are not suitable for family life, so before you get married, you must go through this process, or else you'll face the following. Either you'll choose the wrong woman because you don't understand women and you'll make yourself miserable, or you'll accidentally choose the right one and make her miserable because you're not ready. You need to manage a woman, but how can you manage her if you can't manage yourself? Managing yourself starts with managing stress. If you don't prepare mentally beforehand, you'll make not only yourself and your potential wife miserable, but also your children and their future. If you're already married and your interest in your wife has decreased, this video lecture will help regulate that too. Because first, there's no woman you won't get tired of, even in an intimate sense. Second, even if you don't get tired of her, if you can't manage the situation, she'll get tired of you and become more conflict-prone. Your nerves will fail and you'll make many mistakes. And third, as I said, the practice of restraint gives you resilience not only in relation to women, but in your entire life. When you successfully practice restraint, even during the process, you'll feel how much you're changing and how calm, peaceful, and rational you're becoming. Then you'll realize how harmonious you've become internally and how chaotic your inner state was before, meaning how you are today. The important thing is that many of you won't realize this today and now, so despite everything, you need to start doing it first, and then you'll definitely feel the results. And to not just rely on my word, I'll explain the logic to you. But first, let's conduct a small experiment on your feelings. Look at this woman, or choose any type of woman on the internet based on your depraved fantasies. Dive deep into your fantasies. Make these fantasies as realistic as possible in your mind. Imagine you have such a car with this woman sitting next to you and you're going together to this place where you'll have a blast for 2 weeks. You have everything you desire. The food you want, the drinks you want, the sea, golden beaches, concerts, extreme activities and drives. Immerse yourself in this fantasy and exaggerate even more what you would add, and imagine it all as realistically as possible. Then observe your internal state, what's happening inside you. Dopamine is released, which is the main motivational neurotransmitter hormone that gives you pleasure in advance by imagining this or that scenario. And you don't realize that even this elementary, seemingly insignificant imagination plays a huge role in your life in the long run. It causes significant psychological and spiritual harm. Not just you, the vast majority don't realize this. And it's natural because the environment we grow up in doesn't match our genetic norms, which define how much of what should be. And I said even imagination. But when that motivation leads you to achieve it in practice, that's an accomplishment. The vast majority dream of all this, and you achieved it. In reality, it's a much greater level of harm to your spirituality and limbic system in the long run. I'll give you a very simple practical example of how uncontrolled dopamine affects your psyche in the short term. An example you've done before but haven't observed. When you wake up in the morning, play some loud, cool music, something that makes you feel like a great person. Listen and imagine the standard scenario you always do when listening to cool music. The one that gives you chills when you imagine proudly stepping out of your dream car, walking on the red carpet with women fighting for your attention. But you ignore them and head towards that specific woman you dream of. Imagine all of this. Let the maximum dose of dopamine be released as a result of the music and your accompanying imagination. Enjoy this process to the fullest, and then observe how you feel a few hours later that day. You'll feel bad, have a slight depressive period. And this will definitely happen. It's inevitable. The thing is, it happened every time before, you just didn't know, and that's why you didn't pay attention, or your hormonal homeostasis is so disrupted that you no longer have the awareness to engage in real self-awareness. You especially need to go through the practice of restraint to bring yourself into balance. Why does all this happen? How does this dynamic work? Let's say this is your hormonal homeostasis, your usual balance, which is conditionally zero. In the morning you play cool music, dive into fantasies, dopamine is released, you experience pleasure, and it goes to 1. A few hours later it doesn't return to 0, it necessarily first goes to -1 and after some time returns to 0. That -1 is your slight depressive state. And I theoretically brought it back to 0 and drew it linearly for you to understand the logic. In practice, you become emotionally unstable, and over time, this process becomes much more dynamic and unpredictable. The thing is, this world has its own rules. It is created very ideally, and the lawfulness is completely preserved. Whether you like it or not, whether you think it's good or bad, it changes nothing. Your subjective views and feelings do not change objective reality. You change. Your biochemistry changes, which is part of the cause and effect of this world. Your subjective perception of objective reality changes. You become more and more detached from reality. You create illusions for yourself and consider those illusions as reality. Consequently, your subsequent actions change. Even today's actions, which you consider insignificant, change the outcome that awaits you. Why does everyone start everything on Monday and then fail to actually start? Take exercise, for example. I'll start exercising on Monday. Either that Monday never comes, or if it does, it comes with artificially pumped dopamine. You get pumped with this motivation, start exercising on Monday with full enthusiasm, but by Tuesday you're back to 0, and by Wednesday there's a small dose of depression. This indicator is individual. It happens to everyone at different times and with different dosages. The more you shake your dopamine system in your daily life, the more frequent and rapid your mood swings are today and now. And the more you shake it today, the bigger and more inevitable the depression that awaits you. In this case, size doesn't matter. The principle and logic are the same. I'll tell you why you can't start exercising on Monday. Because first, you lack the ability to make decisions. Second, you have no discipline. And third, there is no trace of real healthy principledness in you. All three are united by self-restraint. If you lack the ability to restrain yourself, you can't have any of them. You will become successful by chance and unsuccessful by chance. You don't control the rhythm of your life. Everything happens on its own, and you just have the illusion of control. This illusion grows stronger every day and forces you to shake your dopamine system more and more. And the more you shake it, the stronger it gets. It's an unstoppable cycle from which you can't escape while feeling comfortable. You will inevitably have to step out of your comfort zone and inflict a significant and peak stress on yourself to break your old version and create a new, much improved and stronger version. What is the difference between the psyche of a woman and a man? I've talked about this many times in public videos, and you may have heard it, but to tie the logic of this video together, I'll tell you anyway. A woman has the ability to adapt to long-term stress, whereas a man does not. What does this mean? For example, in a relationship where a woman and a man ignore each other, neither writes, calls, nor contacts. The essence and content of the ignore is that, although neither side openly talks about it, subconsciously both understand that the one who will make the first contact is the one for whom the relationship is important and who needs it more to receive the same dopamine. Accordingly, the one who initiates contact first concedes the balance of power, meaning they take a weaker position in the relationship. Therefore, the one who holds out longer assumes a stronger position. However, understanding total ignorance and recognizing when a woman is genuinely affected by being ignored and when she should be brought out of it requires separate knowledge. In most cases, you shouldn't bring a woman out of ignorance at her first message because she goes through certain stages, which is a separate topic I plan to cover in a video lecture soon. The point is that since women have the ability to adapt to long-term stress, and ignoring is of course stress, a woman can endure being ignored without issue. Men, however, give up quickly. They simply cannot endure long-term stress. However, men have the ability to overcome a single peak stress, which women do not. So, to understand the point, if a man decides to ignore a woman with the decision that his relationship with her is over, he subjects himself to a peak stress, overcomes it, and completely disregards the woman. This cannot be done without the practice of restraint. It's simply impossible if your interest in the woman is high. In such a case, the man no longer has to endure being ignored, but the woman does. Yes, a woman can endure for quite a long time, but as time passes and the man does not initiate contact, the stress within the woman naturally increases and does not decrease as many think. It seems she has been disregarded. The woman reaches a peak stress level she can no longer endure, which forces her to contact you and restore the relationship at any cost. In other words, women do not have the ability to cope with peak stress, while men do not have the ability to cope with long-term stress. How can we use this fact correctly? That's exactly what we should do now and every day. We need to subject ourselves to peak stress, cut off all triggers that shake our dopamine and nervous system. How should you start the practice of restraint? We all know we are driven by three main instincts: self-preservation, reproduction, and domination. All three are closely linked and have the most direct and significant impact on our hormonal background and consequently our nervous system. It turns out that you must declare a battle against all three to confine them within certain limits to experience real free will. And you do all this not to become some supernatural person, but simply to become a person. In reality, today and now, the vast majority of us are slaves to our passions. For a banal example, your interest in a woman at the beginning of the video stems from the reproduction instinct. A car and a villa stem from the domination instinct, while food stems from self-preservation. All of this has already influenced you and had a greater impact than you imagine. We do all this daily, and each time we raise the stakes even higher. Therefore, what you need to do and where you should start the practice of restraint is as follows. The first is to organize your food and the timing of its intake. I will soon explain how to do it. But first, let me tell you why this seemingly insignificant thing is very important. First, your gastrointestinal tract is directly connected to your nervous system. Observe both yourself and others. The more unbalanced a person is in terms of food, the more unstable their nervous system is. When you're hungry, you're much more aggressive. Things that wouldn't bother you when you're full become irritating. On the other hand, an improper diet harms your health. For example, there's a common belief that sugar is only what directly contains sugar. In reality, any carbohydrate eventually breaks down into glucose in our body. Bread is sugar, wheat is sugar, and sugar is obviously sugar. The difference between all these sugars is the glycemic index of the carbohydrate. Forget everything you knew or heard about carbohydrates until now. It doesn't provide any practical information, it just confuses your brain. Remember the following, which will be useful in practice. The glycemic index of a carbohydrate determines how much it raises blood sugar. The higher the glycemic index of a carbohydrate, the more it raises blood sugar. Conversely, the lower it is, the less it raises. In other words, the more constructive elements there are in a carbohydrate molecule, the lower its glycemic index. The more broken down the structure of the carbohydrate, the higher its glycemic index. Now I will explain it even more simply so you can understand better. Let's take wheat and bread as examples. Bread is structurally broken down wheat, so the glycemic index of wheat is low, while that of bread is high. You can generally Google the glycemic index. There's a lot of information online about the glycemic index of various foods. Now let's move on to why this is important. We all know that the hormone insulin responds to blood sugar. It is released to balance blood sugar. Exactly as much is released as the blood sugar rises. Another practical example from life. When you eat and your blood sugar rises, the hormone insulin is released, and as soon as it starts balancing the sugar, as the blood sugar level begins to decrease, you immediately feel a mild sense of hunger. You get the feeling that you want to snack on something. And of course you snack, so you don't allow the blood sugar to balance. Consequently, when this routine continues for years, a new hormonal homeostasis is created. A new hormonal balance is formed. On one hand, your entire hormonal system becomes disrupted, and on the other hand, your sensitivity to the hormone insulin decreases. You develop insulin resistance, which is then followed by diabetes. This is exactly why diabetes is one of the most common diseases today. Therefore, from today, we are switching to a type of diet known as intermittent fasting. What does this eating style look like? As we know, one day consists of 24 hours. Out of these 24 hours, we eat for 6 hours and fast for the remaining 18 hours. How do we do all of this? For example, you wake up every day at 7 in the morning. For the next 5 hours after waking up, you don't eat anything. That means you don't eat anything until noon. You only drink as much water as you want, and as often as you want. Then, at noon, you start your eating window, and for the next 6 hours, until 6 in the evening, you eat as much and as often as you want. Then you start fasting again, and only drink water until you go to sleep. The next morning, you do the same thing. You start eating 5 hours after waking up, following the exact same principle. and so on every day. Personally, I've been eating like this for 7 years now. Initially, the first few weeks were difficult for me, but since then, I haven't felt any discomfort. On the contrary, I feel much better. I'm not dependent on food at all anymore. Fasting doesn't affect my mood or my ability to make decisions in any way. It also reflects on my thinking ability. That's why it's very important to maintain this eating regime. It's directly connected to your nervous system and your health. The second method is a contrast shower. We've all heard about cold showers, but no one really talks about why and how they're better, let alone explains it. Let's first answer the question, and then I'll explain why. First, we stand under the hottest water possible for a while until our body adapts well to that temperature. Then we turn off the hot water and suddenly switch to completely cold water. We never pour cold water on our head, only on the face and body. Here's the specificity. Initially, I understand it will be difficult if you haven't practiced this type of thing before, and your heart might race. If you don't have any heart problems, then there's nothing to worry about because stress hormones like adrenaline, noradrenaline and cortisol are released at that time. We stand as long as we can and endure a little longer. Every day we stand longer and longer. Today and now it may seem impossible, but if you follow this principle, in just 3 weeks you'll be able to bathe in completely cold water. So what seems impossible today is possible in just 3 weeks. Now, what do we pay attention to? It's very important to consider this. When you turn on the cold water, you should try not to be tense. You should relax and accept the fact that you have no other choice. You should have that inner feeling and achieve that. So you stand under the cold water without tensing up or worrying. It's the same as when something bad happens in life that you can't change, and worrying is pointless. You just have to accept that pain. So you should relax as much as possible under the cold water. We stand until our body feels well burned. Then we turn off the water and don't dry off. We stand and observe the changes in our body. How the cortisol and adrenaline hormones start to decrease and how the natural feel-good hormone endorphin, known as the happiness hormone, is released. Just observe and feel all of this and enjoy the situation. Now let's answer the question why. Because we have a genetically determined hormonal balance. Yes, it changes somewhat throughout our lives, but it never changes completely. Our genes are not adapted to today's comfortable and safe environment. They still think we are in the wild, where there is danger every day. How does this system work? Let's say we are in the wild and encounter a bear. Adrenaline, noradrenaline and cortisol are released within us. It forces us to act. We either have to fight or flee. In any case, this process cannot last for a century. Either you overcome it or it eats you. Either you escape or it catches up and eats you. If it eats you, everything is clear anyway. But if you overcome it or escape, then these stress adrenaline hormones begin to decrease, and the survival hormone endorphin is released, which rewards you for that action and puts you in a good mood. Now, what happens in our current comfortable and safe world? If there is no such trigger around, these stress adrenaline hormones are released on their own because that's how our body is designed. That's exactly why sometimes, even when nothing bad is happening around you, your mood worsens, and you start having negative thoughts, creating certain cause and effect connections, and largely creating illusions. The more disrupted your system is, the more you get involved, and you might even argue with someone unnecessarily because of your suspicions. This is exactly where a contrast shower helps us. From the morning, when we perform everything I described earlier, we remove our daily stress adrenaline norm, and then it doesn't release unnecessarily and on its own. That's one advantage. The second advantage is that over time, your resistance to stress increases. That's exactly why you can swim in completely cold water. Nothing that used to bother you will irritate you anymore. Consequently, you not only become stoic, but also have a significant impact on rational thinking. The third and even more important point, perhaps the most important, is that today there are many sexual triggers around us. Open social media, and everywhere there are breasts and butts. Turn on the TV, and there are breasts and butts. Stop your car at a red light, and a woman with exposed breasts and butt walks by. We create the illusion that we have gotten used to all this, and that it has no impact on us. However, remember the example of a song. Even a simple song has a significant impact on us. Now, just theoretically compare it to one of our main instincts, which we call the reproductive instinct. How much influence do those breasts and butts have on us, and we don't realize it? It affects our daily motivation, our stress, our decision-making ability, and consequently, our thinking ability. People don't realize how much all this affects us while they are in the process. You develop an illusion of control, and therefore you shouldn't wait for realization. So there is only one way to fight this. You must forbid yourself all of this. Under no circumstances should you look at breasts and butts, whether online, outside, or even in your thoughts. You must regulate yourself even at the level of thought. As soon as such thoughts arise and stimulate you to engage and receive a dose of dopamine from the anticipation of that tempting scenario, you must immediately block it and shift your attention. I won't even mention visiting themed sites or engaging in physical battles. I think it's clear that you shouldn't do any of that either. As for intimate relationships, there are two scenarios. If you don't have a wife for at least 6 months, no intimacy and no women. Under no circumstances should you approach them. You need to cleanse yourself of all these sexual triggers. Your health won't suffer any problems. There's no need to fear that. On the contrary, as I said, you'll regulate your nervous system, establish a new balance within yourself, and you won't be dependent on sexual triggers at all. Nothing of the sort will affect you anymore. Your sexual desire will be in your hands. You'll choose the woman and direct it entirely towards whomever you wish. A woman won't be able to arouse you on her own. You'll have that function on a button that will be in your hands. You might say that you're not influenced by it anyway because you're a strong person. Believe me, just do it, and after 6 months, you'll become an even stronger person. You'll completely reassess your attitude towards life and women, and after all this, you'll start seeking entirely different values in a woman. If you have a wife, the principle is the same, with just one adjustment. You'll naturally have intimacy with your wife, but you should reduce the frequency, once or twice a week. Let's imagine unhealthy hamburgers from McDonald's, which not only contain unclear frozen meat, but are also stuffed with manipulative sauces to entice and make you dependent. As long as you're hooked on that, the healthy cutlet prepared from freshly slaughtered meat by your grandmother in the village will seem tasteless. But as soon as you hold back a little and stop eating unhealthy hamburgers stuffed with manipulative sauces, the healthy cutlet prepared by your grandmother will taste much better when you get hungry. That's why many people get tired of intimacy with their wives. It's often due to this. On one hand, you see attractive women everywhere, imagining them in various poses. On the other hand, you've been with your wife so many times in a row that she becomes dull to you. And the problem is largely not with your wife, it's in your approach. So as soon as you restrain yourself from the sexual triggers of the outside world and have intimacy with your wife less frequently, it will be much more enjoyable. And you should start doing all this today and now. Don't wait for Monday. No Monday will come on its own. Don't wait for temporary motivation achieved by pumping dopamine. Don't expect some magical force from the sky, hoping that one day you'll wake up filled with supernatural energy and change everything. Especially when you have that supernatural energy in the form of free will and aren't using it. You need to start the change today and now. Starting today, you should begin practicing these 3 seemingly insignificant things at any cost of temptation. You need to cultivate discipline within yourself, the ability to make decisions and maintain principles, which means the ability to exercise restraint. Only in this way will you gain true free will. In 2 or 3 weeks, you will start perceiving everything differently. You will see the world and people with entirely new eyes. Right now, you can't understand or feel this. You need to start practicing directly, and then you will understand. You will change. And as I said, you are not doing these simple things to become some supernatural person. You are doing all this just to become a human being. Until then, you are a slave to your animalistic instincts and don't even realize it. The vast majority live this way, and in such a state, you won't be able to choose a normal woman because you are entirely elsewhere and don't understand. Even if you manage to choose a normal woman, you won't be able to have a creative relationship with her. You will ruin yourself, ruin the woman, and if you have children, ruin their future as well. Therefore, start practicing these 3 seemingly insignificant things, and over time, you will see how much you, your perception, and everything around you will change. The approach of indulging now and finding a wife later is foolishness and stupidity, because by indulging, you shake and disrupt your dopamine system. What you practice develops within you. You can't become wise through a depraved lifestyle. On the contrary, you become more corrupt. Therefore, you need to develop restraint within yourself. Only in this way can you achieve a certain inner harmony and spiritual peace. Start doing these 3 things today and now. It will be difficult at first, but you will overcome it. And once you overcome it, you will never be as weak as you were before.